what you have here now is a new breed of politicians who are going to fight for the people, who are going to fight for justice, because you are the people with the power, not the politicians. You are the ones with power. And I want to give you back that power.
With a long history of activism that dates back to her days as an undergraduate at the University of the West Indies, Hulsie Bhaggan has had a multifaceted career in business management, trade unionism, politics, and social development.
Well, this is the tale, oh such a tale of a girl called the Sugar Belt Queen. This girl called Hulsie, yes.
Growing up in the village community of Guayma in central Trinidad, Hulsie is no stranger to lobbying and working class issues.
Well, I grew up in a small village called Guayma. In those days, there was only one highway connecting the north to the south. It was the Princess Margaret Highway. And that village really was an indentured village in the sense that most of the indentured laborers of that area had settled there, and it was really just off the Caroni Swamp. And most of them had built that village by hand, by actually literally carrying mounds of dirt in their buckets and so on. And I grew up there with, it was 14 of us actually, 7 sons, 7 daughters. I'm number 13. And for me, my childhood growing up in Guayma was quite happy because I lived with my family. We were materially very poor. But because we were a family that lived together, worked together, and all our pains and hurts and happiness we shared together, it was a very good foundation for me in growing up and understanding the value of relationships.
The villagers of Guayma lobbied government for about 10 years to compensate and relocate residents who would have lost their homes as a result of the expansion of the Uriah Butler Highway. It was in this environment and out of this struggle that Hulsie's social activism was nurtured.
What influenced me mainly really was my parents. They were people who stood for really good human values. They believed a lot in honesty, integrity, being very outspoken, caring for people, compassionate, loving your country, your community. So for me, my formative years really were influenced a lot by what they taught and how they lived their own life. They worked very hard, and despite the fact of not having a lot of material things, they kept their life very simple and they focused on the simple things generally. And I think also I became very sensitive to the poor because I myself was, we were materially poor. I say materially because from a human interest point of view, we were happy as a family. But yes, there were times when we didn't have food to eat. So I really understood a lot about the poor, and I've kept my life as simple as I can. And throughout my life, I've been very sympathetic to the people who are poor, and I feel that they are people who should be helped.
One of 14 children, Hulsie saw education as a means to make a stronger contribution to her family and country. This led her to attaining a BSc in Management Studies and an MBA from the University of the West Indies.
If you breathe too hard in the central yard, she bound to be on the scene. And so the people get mean and they went to the queen and they begged she to intervene. This girl called Hulsie, yes.
As she recalls, her entry into politics was simply another step in her life.
The government at the time wanted to build a dual carriageway, which is now the Uriah Butler Highway. And they said they were going to remove the Guayma residents. They were under the mistaken impression, apparently, that these people were squatters, but really they weren't squatters. They were people who owned those lands. And so we waged a 10-year battle with the then government to get just compensation and to be relocated. And during that time, I met people like Mr. Basil Pandey and Mr. Lawrence Maraj, Mr. Winston Dukaran. So those were people who were involved either in politics or in public life. And while at that time, I became involved with the trade union more formally, the All Trinidad Sugar and General Workers Trade Union. And I helped to establish the Women's Arm. And I also helped to set up the HEAL Center, which is the Center of Drug Prevention and Rehabilitation. There came a point when I became the Education and Research Officer for the union. And this all culminated at a time when there was a split in the NAR government, and there was the formation of Club 88. So I was also involved in Club 88. And then naturally it all progressed into forming the United National Congress. So I was, in fact, the first public relations officer and the first executive of the United National Congress. So that was my entry into politics. But frankly speaking, I did not plan to enter into party politics at any time. It was just a natural progression from the work I was doing, because I see politics not as holding a position in a parliament, but I see politics as serving people.
A founding member of the United National Congress, Hulsie Bhaggan sat on the opposition benches and served as the Member of Parliament for Chaguanas from 1992 to 1995. Dynamic, energetic, and committed to representing her constituents, Hulsie became well known as a fearless champion of people's rights in and out of Parliament, leading several protest demonstrations and using an activist and proactive approach. Hulsie frequently made the news headlines.
I really just wanted to be different and to really make Parliament real and to make the connection between the Parliament and the people. I didn't believe that it should be so removed, because what I found is there was a degree of alienation between the parliamentary system, the Parliament and the politicians, and the average citizen out there who are living everyday life.
Some of her active constituents recall their experiences of working with Hulsie.
When Hulsie was the MD for Chaguanas, I was the president of the Market Vendors Association, and at that time the market was in a very dilapidated state, and I thought it was very unfair for people to come to shop there in those conditions. And together with her, we made representations to the Borough Corporation. At that time, the mayor was Mr. Mulchan Sichan. He was very accommodating. We had meetings with him, and it was fruitful. And now we have a more modern one, which took some years, but it did come to pass with her representation, that is Hulsie Bhaggan's.
I think one of the major things was that whatever representation she was making, she always sought to get the people, the constituents involved in that. Whatever delegation that was going to meet a minister or a minister was coming to meet, she always insisted that people from the village be part and parcel of that delegation. I think that was very significant.
So the grey-head man phone Wade and Ram and asked them boys what's next. They said, listen man, she breaking away this girl called Hulsie.
While Hulsie had the support of her constituents, her style of politics led to her expulsion from the United National Congress, and she was relegated to the backbenches of Parliament.
I think the main challenge was fighting against a system that's very traditional, a system that maintained and perpetuated a way of thinking where there was a stereotype. Now, I don't mind a party line, but I believe when you're going to develop the party line or the position you're going to take on a particular bill, there ought to be proper discussions, debates, and there must be consensus. And so my greatest challenge was actually being able to conform to that thinking, where I had to just, whatever position that was taken, even though I did not contribute or I did not perhaps support the concept, but I had to go along with it. I didn't like the idea also of adversarial politics, where we have opposition and government. And so the country was supposed to be divided along those lines, opposition and government. I felt once we sit in the Parliament and we are all there together, and we are all representing our constituencies, that we ought to work together. And when elections time come, well, of course, we can go at each other. That's okay. That's part of the process. But in the actual running of the country and running of the Parliament, I really believe that we should have had more collaboration. And while you have, as the opposition, you've got to point out the deficiencies in the bills and bring up your own recommendations and so on. I felt the opposition needed to do that, and the government needed to listen.
This girl called Hulsie, yes. They said she do a dollar wine on we party line. Well, that get man they vex. This girl called Hulsie, yes.
A firm believer in putting the people and the issues first, Hulsie made another resounding statement when she voted with the government on the corporal punishment bill.
While now there's a lot of crime in Trinidad and Tobago, there was a time in the 90s when crime really had started to show its ugly head. And the government of the day felt that they needed to be a little more tough on what's happening. And they were introducing an amendment, I believe, to the corporal punishment bill. And the party to which I was attached at the time felt, well, we should go and just not vote against the amendment. And I know that at that time there was such a big problem with crime in the country. People were crying out for help. There were so many issues surrounding crime. And I felt, why are we, looking at this whole issue as if it's something to play a game with? And interestingly, I also felt that the position that the party was taking at the time, it was one that was based on the rights of the perpetrator. Now, I have no problems with the perpetrator having rights, but it was not being balanced with the rights of the victim. So I said, well, why are we seeking the rights of the perpetrator and not being sensitive to what's happening to the victims? We got to have balance here. And I really don't support this position that we are taking. And of course, the party insisted that they have to do that. So when we went into Parliament, I said, I've had enough of this. So I stood up and I said, I support the bill. And I explained why. And of course, that got me into plenty of trouble because I went against the party line.
Tell them who's hear what she say. This girl called Hulsie.
While still a member of Parliament, Hulsie and other concerned citizens formed the Movement for Unity and Progress. An advocate for affordable food prices, Hulsie led an MUP campaign during which she fasted for 7 days and nights on the steps of the Parliament building.
We were really petitioning the government to lower the prices on basic foods and to manage the prices on basic foods. And we went from marketplace to marketplace, and we were throughout the island, and we were able to get 20,000 signatures on that petition. And people were willing, people from all levels in society were willing to sign that petition because they felt it was a worthy cause, and it was to help the underprivileged to survive, to get the food they needed.
When the 1995 elections were held, Hulsie Bhaggan fought on an MUP ticket simply to reinforce her political philosophy.
I didn't change who I was. One of the things I've made a commitment to myself about is that I will always try my best to be me. I'm not going to be somebody else. I'm not going to pretend to be anything that I'm not. So when I got involved in politics, in party politics, for me it was important to serve people. It was important to deal with things in an honest, upfront way, to be frank about things, to tell things as they were. And so my entire value system that I had in my personal life and in my community life, I brought it into national life. And so quite often I would get involved in activities and I would do things. For most people it was strange, and so I became what they used to call me as a controversial MP. And I was just simply being what an MP should be. And when we sit in the Parliament, there is a card in front of us that says Shogunas or Port of Spain North or Laventille West. It doesn't call a party name. It doesn't even put our name. So we are there to represent that part of the country. And in my thinking, I felt that as a member of Parliament, we are supposed to be familiar with all the issues affecting our constituency. And when we come into the Parliament, we must talk at two levels. One, we must be able to deal with policy that affects the entire country. And secondly, we must be able to bring to the Parliament issues affecting our constituents.
A leader by example, Hulsie Bhaggan is committed to participatory politics.
Because the people felt comfortable around her. They felt that if they had a problem, she will show that she is part of their problem too. And she never just took it down in writing and a phone call back and forth. She was part and parcel of her constituency. And that was very comforting to the people of that constituency.
Her sincerity and her commitment, her compassion, and that she is so well balanced. I wanted to make this point because she's one of the few politicians that I know that has both intellectual and emotional competencies. And that is a very rare quality in politicians. She's balanced and committed to the people that she served.
Although she ceased being a Member of Parliament in 1995, Hulsie Bhaggan has remained in touch with national issues. Now an executive member of the Congress of the People, Hulsie is once more an active politician. Whether she's teaching business management, working with marginalized groups, or carrying out her responsibilities as clinical director of the New Life Ministry's Drug Rehabilitation Center, she continues to be at the forefront of national development. Armed with weapons of truth, justice, integrity, and selfless service, Hulsie Bhaggan continues to be a passionate advocate for the people.